When we picture the Industrial Revolution, our minds usually jump to steam engines, roaring furnaces, and giant smokestacks. But the real revolution, the one that truly changed everything, wasn't just about technology. It was about people. It was this massive event that took the entire way people in Europe lived, completely shattered it, and then rebuilt it from scratch. So today, we're going to dive into how this era didn't just build factories, it actually built our modern social world.
And wow, this really puts the scale of that change into perspective. On one side, you've got the world as it had been for centuries, life centered around the farm, the village, and tradition. Then, boom. On the other side, you get the new world, these chaotic, sprawling cities all humming to the relentless rhythm of the factory. It was a total, complete upending of society, and it all happened in just a couple of generations.
So out of all this chaos, two brand new social classes started to form, and they had identities so powerful they would go on to define politics and culture for the next 200 years. So let's meet the main characters in this story, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
First up, we have the proletariat. So who were they? Well, this was the enormous new working class. These were the people who left the farms behind to come to the cities and fuel the engines of industry, literally, with their physical labor in the factories and down in the mines. They were the muscle of this new age.
Now, this identity, being part of the working class, it wasn't just some label. It was forged out of pure necessity. I mean, think about it. When you moved to the city, you left your entire support system behind, your family, your village. So people had to create new safety nets, like these mutual aid societies, just to look out for each other. And that shared, often brutal experience of factory life created this incredible sense of solidarity. They really were all in it together.
And then, on the other side of the coin, you have the bourgeoisie. Now these were the so-called white-collar workers, the factory managers, the engineers, the lawyers, the doctors. They were the brains and the capital behind the industrial machine, not the ones getting their hands dirty.
The bourgeoisie had a totally different way of defining themselves. They showed off their newfound status through philanthropy, funding things like schools and hospitals. They formed these exclusive social clubs like the Freemasons to network and build connections. And maybe most importantly, they used their money to physically escape the pollution and chaos of the industrial city by moving to the world's very first suburbs.
But while the middle class was moving out, the working class was just flooding in. And this incredibly fast, completely unchecked growth led to a massive crisis right at the heart of the industrial world, the city itself.
The thing is, cities were just not ready for this tidal wave of people. To house everyone, developers just threw up these super cheap, incredibly crowded apartment buildings called tenements. They were built as fast and as cheaply as humanly possible, with basically zero thought for the people who would have to live inside.
And when I say zero thought, I mean it. We're talking about buildings with no indoor plumbing at all. Human waste? Often just tossed out the window onto the street below. There was no proper ventilation, so the air was just stagnant and thick, and, well, you can imagine.
The result of these conditions was, as you might guess, completely devastating. These cramped, damp, airless tenements were the perfect breeding ground for airborne diseases. And the most famous killer of the era was tuberculosis, which just ripped through the working-class neighborhoods of these new cities. This revolution didn't just reshape the cities, it reached right into the home and completely remade the most fundamental unit of society, the family. And just like with everything else, it created two very, very different realities for the rich and the poor.
For the bourgeoisie, a whole new ideal popped up called the cult of domesticity. See, as middle-class men started earning more money, they could afford to support their whole family on just one income. So the man's job was to be out in the public world of work, while the woman's place was seen as the private, domestic world of the home.
Okay, so this is the key difference. For a middle-class guy, having a wife who did not work outside the home was the ultimate status symbol. It was proof that he was a successful provider. But for a proletariat family, a working wife wasn't a status symbol, she was an absolute economic necessity. Her wages were vital for the family to just survive.
And it wasn't just the wife's income they needed. That same brutal economic logic applied to children. This quote really says it all. For the working class, sending your kids to work wasn't some moral failing. It was just simple, harsh math you had to do to keep food on the table.
But, in the middle of all this hardship and change, a really surprising and very modern idea started to take hold. People, especially in the middle class, began to think that you should marry for love and companionship, not just for financial security or family alliances.
The companionate marriage was born.
Okay, so the early decades of industrialization were pretty bleak, that's clear. But eventually, society started to push back. The second half of the 19th century saw the slow, steady dawn of reform, new rights for workers, and an idea that was totally new for most people: free time.
Now, this progress didn't just happen overnight. It was a long, hard-fought battle. It started with small but crucial steps, like the Factory Act of 1833, which was one of the very first laws to put limits on child labor. Then you get the Mines Act, which pulled women and young children out of the most dangerous jobs underground. And by 1847, the 10 Hours Act started to limit the length of the workday itself. Each one was a small victory in a really long fight.
And this quote gets to the huge idea behind those laws. The Factory Act was revolutionary, not just for what it did, but for the principle it established, that the government actually had a duty to step in and protect its most vulnerable citizens from the worst parts of industry. This was a totally new concept at the time.
So you take these reforms, you combine them with other factors, and you start to see real, tangible improvements by the end of the century. Wages slowly started to climb, people's diets got better, and cities began investing in things like sanitation systems and public parks. Life was still incredibly hard, don't get me wrong, but for a lot of people, it was getting a little bit better.
And with a little more money in their pockets and a little more free time, something amazing happened. Leisure culture was born. For the first time, huge numbers of people had time and money for things other than just work and survival. Spectator sports like rugby and boxing got huge. Theaters and music halls opened up. A whole new economy built around fun started to emerge.
And this just brings that era to life, doesn't it? I mean, can you imagine the thrill of seeing or even riding one of these wild new contraptions, a bicycle, through one of the city's brand new public parks? That was a kind of freedom and fun their parents could never have even dreamed of.
And here's a change that might be the most familiar of all. With the invention of the giant department store, shopping went from being a simple chore to a form of entertainment, a recreational activity you could do with friends. Modern consumer culture had officially arrived. So, as we wrap things up, it's pretty clear that the smokestacks and the factories were really just the beginning. The real, lasting legacy of this era was social. It literally created the blueprint for the class structures, the family dynamics, and the city life that we're still living with today. And that brings us to a final question for you to think about. When you look at your own life, which parts of this 19th century blueprint do you see? The very idea of a 9-to-5 workday or a weekend? The separation of our work life and our home life? Even the idea of going shopping for fun? It all started here. What do you think is its most powerful, lasting legacy?